Hello everyone, and welcome to our event this evening, which is our webinar on what is autism. Thank you so much. I can see quite a number of people who have joined us tonight. We're really excited to have you all here, and we're really excited to explore this topic. This is just one of a number of events that will be running over Autism Month, which of course is April. So tonight we're delighted to be joined by a range of guests. We have Davida Hartman and Tara Killen. We have Brian Irwin and we have Miriam Kenny, who are all going to be speaking to you about their own experiences and knowledge on this topic. What's also great about this month and the events that we're running is that at least once a week we will be having an event for those who are not part of the autism community, so that we can spread that message of autism acceptance outside of our immediate community and try and spread as much inclusion as possible. So once again, thank you so much to everybody who's tuned in. If you enjoy tonight's event and if you want to sign up to a number of the other free events that we're running over the month, you're of course more than welcome, but we would also really welcome your support in being able to continue to provide this service for you. So if you would like to visit asiam.ie/donate, we'd really appreciate any support that you can offer. But in addition to that, if you want to sign up to any of the events, you can click on the events tab on the AsIAm website. You'll also see at the bottom there is a Q&A box. So if anybody has any questions, please submit them into the Q&A box. And then at the very end of the webinar, we will have some time allocated to direct questions to the relevant people. So I am going to now hand over to Davida and Tara, who are going to be presenting to us on autism, the facts. So thank you so much, Davida and Tara. It's over to you now.
Oh, thanks so much, Fiona. And we're absolutely delighted to be here talking about one of our favorite topics. So
yes, we are.
I'm just going to open up here to our presentation. And forgive us if we talk very fast. We've got so many things that we want to say in a very short space of time. So we're going to be talking a little bit about autism, the facts today in this time. We're going to watch a really quick video, and then we're going to be talking around 6 autism facts. And just a little brief introduction to myself. I'm one of the clinical directors and principal psychologists at the Children's Clinic, and also the Adult Autism Practice, which I recently set up about a year ago. And both the Adult Autism Practice is very specifically around assessing and diagnosing autism in adults, and the Children's Clinic, we see a range of differences, but with a very strong speciality in autism. So that's me.
And I'm Tara Killen, and I actually work with Davida as the post-diagnostic support lead in the Adult Autism Practice. I have a master's in coaching psychology and a positive psychology with a vast history of psychotherapy and counselling. And then most recently, I founded Thriving Autistic, which is a support service for autistic adults. I'm also an autistic adult myself, and I am a parent to 3 amazingly brilliant autistic children.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to show a really quick 3.5-minute video, which hopefully I'm actually going to be able to show you now. Hang on one second. It's done exactly what I was worried that it would do. Hang on one second. Sorry, everybody. This is really funny. This is exactly what I was concerned about.
This is the excitement of live presentation.
I'm going to stop sharing for 1 minute and talk, and then what I'll do is I'll fix it up. Okay, now perfect. Here we go.
We're just going to show you a short video when we get that working, and it's comes from Glasgow. Glasgow. Is it Scottish Autism?
Got it here. Here we go.
2 minutes long. That's it. Perfect.
That's just not true. Everybody has autistic traits and everybody presents autistically at different times to a certain extent, but you're only autistic if your brain is built in that way.
Autism isn't a mental health condition. Autism actually is a cognitive difference between you and I. It's not something that should be viewed as flawed or problematic or wrong, something needs treated. It's just how I view the world and how you view the world, and that's okay.
I would say in some ways that as an adult, being autistic in a neurotype typical world, excuse the words, is actually more difficult than it was when I was a child. And obviously I've been autistic all my life. I spent the first 2 years after my diagnosis looking back and working out all the things that were probably due to me being autistic.
Autistic people don't feel empathy? Not true. Autistic people feel empathy just the same as everyone else does. Many autistic people report that they actually are often overwhelmed by other people's emotional states because they feel so strongly. But we may not always demonstrate our empathy in the way that you might expect.
This is a total myth. Many of us autistic people have learning differences. Some of us might require a little bit extra support, but what we do need most of all is just your patience and your understanding.
All autistic people have special skills like Rain Man. This isn't true either. A small percentage of autistic people are savants, which means they have mathematical skills beyond compare or can produce incredible artwork. However, most are regular folk.
There is a myth that you can tell if someone is autistic just by looking at them. Well, that's not true. There are autistic people in all walks of life, in different professions, of different ages, genders, ethnicities, and religions. Autism does not have a look, nor does it always have visible identifying characteristics. And when it does, they do not apply to all autistic people.
Autistic people can find socializing more tiring than non-autistic people, particularly if we have to hide our autism in order to blend in. However, we are not being antisocial. We are actively making an effort to socialize.
So, autistic people always have other conditions. Well, honestly, this is a bit complicated because quite a lot of us do. There's a lot of us with ADHD, for example. There's an awful lot of us that have got mental health conditions. But something that's really important to remember, they are separate.
Autism can be cured. No, it can't. That's not true. It's not an illness. You can't cure or grow out of autism. It's part of a brain difference. We are the beautiful people we were born to be. Value us for who we are. Don't try to cure us. Let's work together to make the world a more understanding and caring place.
So you can see how wonderful that video is. And also, I'll just stop sharing there for a minute. What's so wonderful also about it
So the first fact that we wanted to share with you, and it comes from a human rights perspective, and that is that autism is a neurotype, and it's a form of neurodiversity. So what we mean by that is, in the past, it was assumed that there was one type of brain, and that was the normal type of brain, and that everyone who was in any way different from that was deficient. What we have more recently understood is, just like in nature, where you might have heard of the term biodiversity, in humans, we have neurodiversity, and that means that there are many, many different types of brains. So autism is a neurotype, just like someone who has a brain that has ADHD is a neurotype, or someone who is dyslexic or dyspraxic, and there are other forms of neurotypes.
Fact 2. So current estimates around how common autism is that it's roughly 1 in every 65 people. And again, this is changing all the time. And certainly, I mean, I should say from my adult work, our adult work, we would see that there's a lot of undiagnosed adults out there as well. And there's certainly a lot of undiagnosed women. So we don't know in the future what that estimate would be. So when you think about 1 in every 65 people, if you really think about that in terms of the groups of people that you're in, how many people are in your extended family, or did you go to school with, or are you in work with? And if you think that percentage of people are most likely autistic, that 1 in every 65 people there are autistic. And just like it said in that video, that autistic people are so varied. They're everywhere. So they can be, you can be autistic and be a professional surfer, and you can also be autistic and be in a wheelchair, or you can not use verbal language to speak, or you can be a comedian or a writer. So it's so varied. It's across ethnicities, it's across cultures. There are autistic travelers, there are autistic Black people, there are autistic, so I think that there's this very stereotypical view, and particularly in the past, you would have seen a little blonde white boy child, let's say, and that's what autism was. But it's really about recognizing that autism is all around us. And I think also, particularly when you come to talks like this, that often there can be the impression that we're talking about these other people that aren't in the room or aren't listening. But of course, you could be autistic and not know that you're autistic. If there's someone, autism is genetic. If there's somebody in your family that's autistic, it's possible. Your doctor could be autistic. All these people that you wouldn't necessarily traditionally think could be are. So it's just to really bear that in mind, that autism is us. It's not this other thing that or these other people in this different room. They're a part of us.
Fact 3 is that we really want to get across is that autism is not a line, it's a spectrum. And what we mean by that, hopefully, will be on the next slide.
Yep.
Thanks, Davida. Yeah, so what most people think the autism spectrum looks like, and most of us who first learn about autism think that it's like that image on the left there, where there's a line between some people are less autistic and some people are more autistic. But in reality, what it can actually look like is more this picture here on the right. So you might have somebody who has a lot of extra difficulties with, say, language, but their motor skills are excellent. Or they might have a lot of difficulties with some elements of sensory, the sensory environment. And what that means is they might find it really difficult to be in an environment, say, for instance, if they're on the telephone and there's also a TV on in the room and a radio at the same time and people talking, that can become very, very overwhelming for them. Executive functioning really means planning skills and the ability to plan out what you're doing when you're an adult, if you're a parent, keeping a tidy home, keeping your children fed, washed, following through and all the different things that you need to do. So if you're a child, being able to remember to go and pack your school bag and all the different things that are involved there. So that's where, as a spectrum, you can see that with different autistic people, they will have different parts of that spectrum that are a real challenge for them, and other parts are really easy. But what makes it extra interesting and extra complicated is that these things change over time. So for example, in my own life, we have 3 children who are on the spectrum, who are autistic, and they will all have different needs and different difficulties and different strengths on this spectrum. And it changes over time also. The developmental textbooks that teach us what you expect from your child when they're 1 year old, what you should expect to see when they're 1.5, when they're 2, when they're 3. Those textbooks were written for neurotypical children. And what we know now is that neurodivergent children or autistic children actually have their own timeline, and it's different. I noticed in my family, one of my children was really putting all their attention and focus on language at a very early age. And they were teaching themselves numerical reasoning, and they were teaching themselves to read, but they had no interest in learning how to walk. So they were over 2 before they had any interest in walking. I had another child who had every interest in their motor skills, and they were really excellent at them. In fact, they ran away a huge amount of time. Of the time I had to lock all the doors and the windows, and I was really housebound for a couple of years of their life because they would always run away. But with language, they had no interest in language at all, and they didn't speak until they were over 4. They didn't have any sounds or anything. So in terms of what we used to have heard of about children or adults having very severe autism or very mild autism, we now understand that it's more of a spectrum, and it's really in terms of support needs, and our support needs can change over time and also within contexts. So it's a very complicated thing. We don't have huge amounts of time to get into it much more deeply, but just to give you the basic overview of what we used to understand versus what we now know.
So the 3 areas that are generally associated with autism, social communication, sensory processing, and a newer thing that people are looking at, attention allocation. So these are the differences that when you look, like we were talking earlier about the autism being a neurotype, that you can see oftentimes in autistic people. So when I say social communication, what I mean there is, and again, it's so varied, and I think that's why it's so hard. The autism can be difficult to understand because it's so varied in so many different people. And so say a classic example might be that many autistic people don't like talking to lots of people at the same time. So they would prefer, if they have verbal language, they would prefer to talk to somebody one-on-one, and because they find it hard to take on board all the different communication streams that might happen in a group of people. Another one might be that autistic people in general quite like straightforward communication. You know, they quite value honesty, and something that they might hear a lot what people say to them is that they're being blunt, and sometimes they might be accused of being rude when actually they weren't being rude, they were just, you know, telling the truth. Those kind of things can happen often, and there's a lot of really interesting research now around this to show, because the narrative around autism, and of course it is true. I mean, even as Tara was saying about her own children, that there is a different trajectory, and language delay, you often see language delay compared to neurotypical people with autistic children, and language difficulties and communication difficulties. But actually there's a lot of research to show that autistic people communicate very well, fine with each other, and interact fine with each other and are comfortable with each other. That actually where the difficulties arise is when neurotypical, when I say neurotypical, I mean people without autism, but you know, a typical brain without autism or other neurological differences, that actually it's when the two of them communicate, that's where the issues are. And then often actually it's the neurotypical people that get bored quickly, or you know, don't give the other person enough time. So I think what a lot of autistic advocates would say now is, well, where is the problem really? If we communicate fine with each other, you know, who's to say that we're the ones with the problem, basically. So it's all around reframing those areas of difference, but there definitely is those kind of things. Then sensory processing. So again, oftentimes, I mean, very, very often with autism, there's differences in sensory processing. So what you would often hear about is the difficulties. So again, a lot of the things that you would hear around autism is a huge difficulty with loud noises and with certain textures, and they are certainly something that it's very common. It's very, very common. But I suppose what's also less talked about is maybe the positive aspects of the sensory processing, that autistic people can also you know, see beauty in a light beam, or have intense pleasure from certain sensory aspects. So it's a different way of experiencing the world also, and it can for certain bring it can be disabling when somebody is in a very busy environment that wasn't set up for them, and it can certainly be exceptionally helpful to recognize that sensory processing issues are going on, because it can cause a huge amount of stress and anxiety. Whereas actually if you get the sensory environment right, and you support for example, for a child, a simple support like having noise blocking headphones can make all the difference for that child in being able to be out and doing things they wouldn't be able to otherwise. And then a newer area that people are looking at now is attention allocation, which basically there's a new kind of term, monotropism, And it's around attention, that what a lot of autistic people say is that they like to focus their attention in one area intensely, whereas maybe neurotypical people would spread their attention out to lots of different things. And that's why you see that autistic people and autistic children can be really, really, really focused on one thing and can do that thing really, really well, but might forget to eat or sleep or do any of those things while they're doing that. And then lastly, so a note on stimming, and again, that would be it's one of the things that when a kind of clinician is diagnosing autism, it's one of the things that is looked for. That stimming is another word for self-stimulatory behavior. And so a classic one with autism might be flapping their hands. But I think the really important thing to remember, and I'll hand it over to Tara to talk about stimming now in a second, but I think the most important thing to remember is that everybody stims, absolutely everybody stims. And that again, the narrative in the past with autism was, we need to stop the stimming. You know, that if a child had been flapping hands, that they would have been taught quiet hands and they would have been stopped stimming. But that what we now know is that that's wholly inappropriate, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with stimming. That actually most people with autism, if they do stim, or autistic people, it helps them regulate the world and actually increases their anxiety and upset if they are stopped doing it. So Tara, do you want to add there?
Yeah, we were just chatting about that ourselves earlier, about how even in my own parenting journey, originally, I know that I was told with one of my children who really loved spinning in circles, how, you know, we had to stop them doing that. And I was questioning, well, why exactly? And I was told that it was harmful for them. And that's only like 10 years ago. Whereas now we understand, actually, it's, as you say, it's not only inappropriate to stop a child doing something that actually doesn't harm them, it's harmful to stop them doing it. Mm-hmm. So if a person is stimming, they can either be doing it because they're anxious and they need to get that extra energy out, or they're excited and they're moving, and it's just it's a different physical way of expressing themselves in the world. And it has been shown that it's really harmful to stop people from doing that. Yeah. Unless it is something that is they're actively hurting themselves. And what we find generally, if a person's actively hurting themselves, it's really to more get into the root cause of why they're doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Generally the sensory environment to be doing, yeah.
And I know what people are concerned about is that it's going to bring negative attention to the person and that they're going to be bullied because of it. And I think that's what's so wonderful. But that's what's so wonderful about people like AsIAm are doing in the spreading the word about autism and autism acceptance, that autism is a different way to be. And the more people understand and come to these kind of talks and realize, oh no, that's okay, that's just part of autism, there's nothing wrong with that, that is going to help with it's societal change that needs to happen, really, around acceptance of difference, you know.
Completely. And that's why it's so great that there's so many of you here tonight, you know, family members, friends, community, neighbors, because really when we're looking at all of this from a human rights perspective and recognizing that there are different neurotypes, previously then the goal to try and stop people from behaving and acting and standing out as though they're autistic is, as you said, in case they were bullied, because there was only one neurotype that was acceptable. Whereas now, under a human rights perspective and through neurodiversity, we're really, and with all your help, and AsIAm, as you said, we're really starting to appreciate everybody has an equal right to be who they are in this world. And it's just so wonderful to see not only awareness, but the acceptance and even appreciation growing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so, oops. Fact 5, autism is also often associated with other things that also need support. So again, this was touched on in the video. I think what can often happen is that, so there are things associated with autism. So there are people who are autistic and also have, for example, an intellectual disability, or also have ADHD, or also have significant medical issues like epilepsy. And what happens, and also dyslexia and dyspraxia and all these different things, but what can sometimes happen is that everything is looked at, oh, that's the autism, or significant mental health difficulties, and everything is lumped under the autism, whereas actually it's really important to separate those out and realize that that no, that's not all autism. And maybe that person does have really significant mental health difficulties, but that they may have come from maybe a lifetime of having to hide the autism. I'm just wondering, are you able to see me? Am I glitching a bit?
No, you're not glitching.
No. Okay, perfect.
I did for a second, but it's fine now.
Okay. So it's just really important that those things are recognized and also got support for. So say, for example, a huge area would be sleep. So sleep is a huge issue for a lot of autistic people. And it's really important to recognize that as separate and part of it, because the autistic community, for example, are saying, look, that's what we want research in. That's what we need support in. We need support in sleep. We don't need support in cure or any of those other things. So it's really recognizing those other areas that need support. So finally, fact 6, you'll learn the most about autism from listening to autistic people. This is 100%. So, you know, I'm a psychologist and went to college, obviously, to be a psychologist, but I can tell you that the most important things that I've learned about autism are from listening to autistic people. And the growth in the autistic advocacy movement. So, and there is so much more and more information out there, autistic voices in Ireland and internationally. And it can be anywhere. I mean, there's books, if you're on social media, there's so many different ways of listening to the voices. So for example, the AsIAm website is full of stories and autistic people talking about their lives. I know on our website, the adultautism.ie website, there's in the resources, there's loads of videos of autistic people talking about their lives. And yeah, Tara,
yeah, and there's a new Irish blog actually just out.
Yes, I was just about to say.
Yeah, it's called Out Loud, AUTLOUD, and it's filled with experiences of autistic adults writing about their own experiences. So that, and then Twitter, Facebook, all the different, you normally, if you do a search for neurodiversity or neurodiverse squad or actually autistic on Twitter, but AsIAm have so many links on their website out to the community as well, and I know that they're holding like the whole community webinars all the time, and there's so much information you can get from there.
Yeah. So that's, I think, you know, if you're thinking, oh, there's one thing that I want to do now, I need to learn a bit more about autism, just really look that, you know, is this written by an actually autistic person? Because there's so much information out there in so many different ways. And you're really going to be able to understand it from the inside out if you're actually listening to autistic people. So, yep, that is us. And I don't think we even did that badly with time, did we?
Great.
No, I think you did quite well actually. So well done. Yeah, I think you're perfect there with time. Thank you so much, Davida and Tara. Really appreciate that. There've been a good few questions have come in for you guys, but we'll come to those at the end, if that's okay, just to keep going time-wise. So really appreciate you taking the time to talk through that with us. That was, I'm sure a lot of people were able to take something away from that. And next up we have Brian Irwin, who's going to talk to us now. Brian is a self-advocate and he's also an AsIAm board member, and he's going to discuss his own experiences of being autistic in Ireland. So over to you now, Brian.
Yeah, and to do that I have to unmute my microphone and open my camera again. Sorry, I was sitting there kind of going, when am I starting? When's the light going on? But it was my own thing. Okay, good evening. Thank you so much all for attending. I am, as Fiona said, I'm on the board of directors for AsIAm. I was assessed and diagnosed, actually, I'd say it's almost been 10 years. Oh my goodness. I think this is in my my decade anniversary of being formally diagnosed and assessed as autistic. So I wanted to talk briefly about some of the experiences I've had personally with that journey. First things first, as I say, I'm going to be 31 this year. So I was assessed and diagnosed with autism as being autistic when I was 21, almost 22, which means I spent all of primary school, all of secondary school, a year of college that I failed, and about half of a repeat leaving cert with no support, no diagnosis, no assessment, and no awareness that could even be a factor in my life. The main experience I had with my education experience was teachers just deciding, okay, well, Brian's very verbally coherent. He's a great talker. He knows all the answers to questions in class, but for some reason, he doesn't ever do homework well. He doesn't do essays well. He doesn't do in-class written tests well. I guess he's lazy. He just doesn't want to put the effort in when he has to, I guess. And that was kind of the experience for me before I was assessed for anything. I had to get into a repeat college, which wasn't in the mainstream school system, for anyone to even say, I think something might be happening there in Brian's brain that isn't neurotypical. And even then, when I went and did a battery of tests that are mainly aimed at children, and I was assessed for dysgraphia, as a matter of fact. So Davida and Tara were talking about the comorbidities. A lot of people who are autistic have other conditions as well. I have dysgraphia, and like at that stage, autism wasn't even on the menu. It was just kind of like, Brian's definitely dysgraphic. Maybe get him checked out for autism or something later on. So the kind of, when I was in school and beyond, the culture about autism was there wasn't a culture about autism. There was no way a student who was obviously having trouble had any kind of neurodivergence or any kind of reason other than their own laziness to be, performing poorly in a classroom setting. So getting to that point was quite liberating, I think. It's funny, I say sometimes I think it was one of the best things that ever happened to me was learning that I had learning disorders, because most people would think that's the end of the world. No, how is he going to manage? But I spent the first 2 decades of my life managing, and now that I have my assessment, my diagnosis, I can get support and I can start moving forward and doing things with actually the support that I needed all along. I got a degree from college a few years ago. I got an honors undergrad in environmental science, which is fantastic, and I was able to do that with support. The thing is, many of those were to do with my dysgraphia. The academic supports I got were dysgraphia related, but the amount of resources I was able to lean upon once I knew I was autistic was fantastic as well. I got involved with AsIAm, I think, a year or two after I was diagnosed, which is around the time AsIAM was incepted. So it's I wouldn't say it's a career for me, but it's definitely been a life thing for me. I've been there since the very start of AsIAm. And it's been wonderful to be able to provide the sort of services and support that I needed when I was in my teens. One of the biggest things for me was saying, I wish somebody had been there when I was in my teens or my even younger to say, this is what you need, this is what you have to do. So I went on to hopefully do that. I did a lot of school speakers for AsIAM as a self-advocate. So I would go to schools with an AsIAM workshop and I would talk to students about autism and being autistic, and I do some of the myth busting quite similar to what Davida and Tara were doing. I have interactive things to do with the students and everything. And that was good because it was getting the culture of autism into schools. Because I'd be amazed if half the teachers who I'd been studying under when I was in primary and secondary school would have known what autism was. They certainly didn't know the science when I was in their classroom. And I know with work with agencies like AsIAM and the Middletown Centre and things, I'm drawing a blank now for names, I'm sorry. But work with the people like Davida and Tara and Miriam and Fiona and everybody else in AsIAM does, it's helping to bring awareness and acceptance forward into the classroom. I'm starting to kind of meander a little bit now, so I wrote notes for myself. I'm just going to quickly refresh myself. It's good to take a break every now and then. Okay, so something I was considering for myself was that I don't know what it's like to be an autistic child. So it's very difficult for me to say to parents, here's my experience of being an autistic kid, because I was assessed so late in life. And I've wondered quite often, it was something in the video Davida was showing, somebody was saying that he spent the first 2 years post-diagnosis looking back and figuring out everything that was probably to do with autism in the first place. I have that backwards facing look, but I don't have the lived experience of being an autistic child. And I think something that has come to me in considerations is that if I had been diagnosed when I was a kid, I don't know that I would have, I don't know how I wouldn't be the person I am now. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll never know. But it's looking like it's so very hard to actually get support for children. There's something in the news last week about somebody being told they have to wait until 2026, 27 for their child to be assessed, or to be given support. And then that child probably would have aged out of the support bracket and have to start the applications all over again. And I didn't have to deal with that when I was growing up because frankly, I just knew that I was bad at things. I didn't know there was a reason for it. I didn't know there was a way to get around it. And then when I was assessed and I got the dysgraphia diagnosis and then the autism assessment, I was able to say, okay, right, the reason I'm not succeeding with people or work or college or school or anything is because I'm banging my head off a brick wall when I should just be walking around it. The metaphor I used a lot for presentations and things was that it was like myself and all my peers were told to get to the other side of that mountain and you'll succeed. And my peers all decided they were going to dig through the mountain. And they had jackhammers and rock movers and all sorts of heavy equipment. And I had cutlery. I had like spoons and table knives and things. And I was working really hard to try and get through the mountain. I was working much harder than they were because they would just have to like press go on their machines and wait and just, push the giant drills or whatever. But I was digging really hard. And being assessed was like being told, just Brian, just stop, put those down and walk around or climb over or do something else. Just do something differently. You'll get there in the end. You'll get to where you want to be, but you won't get there this way. So that was huge. It was great to have that particular new aspect of focus on my life. So the academic thing I could go on for, but I think I'll try and stick a little bit something more social. Because I was talking even like today, I think I was talking about small talk and how people don't generally learn that sort of thing. And I remember when I was in school, I would stand aside from groups of people, looking at them and wondering, what are they doing now that I'm not? What are they doing? How are they starting a conversation and getting into that group? What are they doing that I'm not doing? What is happening there? I could not make the pieces line up in my mind and connect so that I could walk up to a group of people and say, how's it going? What's up? I just couldn't figure out an entrance plan. And that was very isolating and alienating. And the fact is that I found out when I went to college then that I could go to societies or clubs and I would find someone it's a special interest thing. I could go to the photography society or something and walk up to somebody and say, hey, can I talk to you about the new whatever model camera is out? Or did you see this photography exhibition that I saw and was really passionate about and spent 3.5 hours looking at or something? And that's a conversation started then. It was all just a matter of just finding people who would talk to me, I could go on about, tribes and cultures and things, but I'm not going to right now. Actually, just as an aside, something that Davida said earlier was a statistic of 1 in 65 people is autistic. I noted this down when Davida said it because I wanted to say it because I thought it was funny to me, was that if 1 in 65 people are autistic, that must mean that I know 64 neurotypical people. And I don't think I could name 65 people that I know off the top of my head at the moment. But it's a consideration I never actually had, is that for that statistic to ring true, I'm the one, and the 64 are just there, I guess. I suppose this is the largest amount of people I've spoken to for more than a year and a half, I'd say, because of everything. So that's another thing as well. Actually, there's 185 attendees I saw is coming, so at least some of you are autistic as well. Now, getting back to the small talk thing as well, is that I found that people, now that I'm autistic, people don't care for the most part, which is very nice to see. I mean, when I was in school, I don't think anyone ever even used autism as an insult because it wasn't something that I was keyed into. It wasn't something that I was aware of. I didn't know I was autistic. I just knew that I was bad at everything. But now that I'm autistic and an adult, or rather now that I'm an adult, I've always been autistic and I just know about it now. I find that when I discuss it with people or I mention it to people, they don't really care. They kind of go, oh, all right. People don't seem to care so much about being autistic. They just seem to care about how much crack you are. Are you in good spirits? Do you bring a good mood to people? Are just basically, are you any crack? Which is the biggest, I think it's the most liberating thing I found, was that I was told I was autistic and it seemed like this terrifying, dreadful thing just to hang over my head. But the culture of people I've been with, even aside from the work I do with AsIAm and other agencies, people just don't seem to really bother that much. Most of the trouble I know with people who are autistic is either trying to get into conversations or it's getting support with school or whatever. And that's part of what I was trying to do with AsIAm in the first place. I'm realizing I'm sort of bad at speaking without moderation. So I'm just going to make sure I haven't got any more burning points to go into before I start talking over myself and chatting in circles and things. I'm very out of practice with talking to people at the moment. So I'll just make sure I'm not, try to make sure I'm not over talking this. And running out of anything interesting to say and just rambling on.
You're doing great, Brian.
Well, thank you, Fiona.
More than happy to keep listening to you before the ad, so don't be worried about that.
I could probably go for ages. I just want to make sure that I'm not over talking. I know Miriam has to speak as well. We've got Q&As later. I just don't want to overrule anybody else, you know.
But you have a couple more minutes, so by all means, if you've more to add, work away.
Okay. Well, yeah, I suppose it's a specificity thing as well, is that now I know I'm autistic, I can address things. Sorry, I just got a text. I can address this, I can identify the specific things that I want to get better on myself. I don't just have this great big negative feeling of I can't do anything right, which is how I felt before I was assessed. I can now say, I don't have the easiest time breaking into social circles because I'm autistic, and that means I don't generally have the same kind of communications apparatus that other people might have. This is just in school, I just figured I was bad and no one wanted to talk to me. Now that I'm an adult and I'm autistic now, I can say it's because I'm not vibrating on the same wavelength they are. I haven't got the same kind of communications apparatus they do. I can find a different way, or I can find different people to communicate with. Like I was saying, I had a lot of good fun in college and societies and things. I've taken up other hobbies since graduating that I'm really enjoying socially, because I can go. One of the things I took up was I started swing dancing, and the people you meet doing that, like, it's just, you meet people who are engaging, they're welcoming, they're physically competent, and they want you to have a good time. And that's, you know, it's something, it's bliss for autistic, for me anyway, as an autistic person, because I can just go there and I can start talking to somebody about, how did you do that one step? Or did you enjoy the music that was just on? Or did you have a good dance or something? I can just start conversations from there, and then I can say, well, how did you come to swing dancing? How did you get started there? So, I mean, where I want to go with this is that being autistic has let me find more of the stuff I'd like to do in my life. I don't feel like I have to do the same thing as everybody else. I don't feel like, obviously with school, I was kind of forced into it. But now that I've gone beyond that, I'm an adult, I can turn around and say, I don't think this one's for me. I'm going to go and do this thing that makes me feel happy instead. So, like, I do events with AsIAm. I just, have all of my hobbies and things that I do, and I feel good. I feel confident, and I feel, proud to be autistic in the way that I am, or which is me, my own way. It's something I was thinking as well about what Tara and Davida were saying, is that Tara's autistic, I'm autistic. We're not the same kind of autistic, but we are both autistic. There's such a wonderful variance with the big color wheel she had with the spectrum. I mean, Tara and I probably have completely different graphs on that spectrum wheel, but we're both still autistic. So it's, you could go on about that for ages, about finding the things we have in common, the things we find differently. But that's true of all human experiences as well, is that we're all wonderfully unique. We're all, in our own way, we're perfect. And whether we're autistic, or we're ADHD, or we have combinations of the two. I'm autistic and dysgraphic, and probably have some other stuff that I haven't got checked out yet. But we're all able to find our own happiness, and we're able to be ourselves and bring our own happiness to our lives, I think. And part of that is always about knowing who you are. I know I'm autistic, and that's good. I find that good. Oh, sugar, I had an idea there and I was going to say something and I've just lost it completely. Fiona, how am I doing for time?
I think you're just about up, Brian, but just to let you know, there's a couple of comments came in for you. One saying that the mountain with the knife and fork is a great analogy. And another parent commented and saying, as a parent of 2 young children on the spectrum, we're happy that someone like you helps to break down stigma, educate and inform kids early about autism. And thank you for being incredible. So I think those are some lovely comments come in for you.
Thank you to the parent. I'm glad I can do that. And I worked really, really hard on the mountain analogy, so I'm glad it's good.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
I'll take questions later. I hope that was useful and informative.
Absolutely, yeah. And I can confirm what Brian said about people just want to know if you're great crack. I can confirm that Brian is in fact great crack. So
I'm in good company, Fiona.
Yes, absolutely. We will move on now because we have Miriam Kenny here with us tonight as well. Miriam Kenny is a parent and she's also a member of Involve Autism D66W, and she's here to discuss her experience of raising a child on the spectrum and the parental experience in a broader way also. So I'll hand over to you now, Miriam.
Hi, I'm just trying to share my screen there. So can you see that? Yeah.
Yep,
Hi,
you can.
I hope you can. Very glad to be here tonight, and thank you so much for asking me, for AsIAM, for asking me to this in what is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month. So I am a parent of an autistic child who is 8, and we would have known quite early on that our child was autistic, because what I'm going to do through this presentation is going to talk a little bit about a journey. So I've gone on a very personal journey myself through this, with our child's diagnosis, with learning how to and educate myself, learning a lot more about autism. And also I have a background in health and education, and I also work in education now as well. So I've a huge interest in this area. So I'm delighted to be here today. So when I was asked to do this, I really thought very hard about it, and I thought, what would be a good thing to do? I could talk all about my own experience, or else I could ask our own parents. So I run an advocacy and support group in South Dublin called Involve Autism. And we've come together about 3 years ago. And within that, we have reached out, and there's lots of parents in the area that are part of Involve Autism. And some of the wordings some of the things that I'm talking about here today will be their experience as well. So it's a collective experience. So I'm going to talk a bit about what is autism from our perspective, from a parental perspective. And it's so lovely to hear Brian there talk about his experience as an adult, and also to listen to Tara, and also to Davida, who a lot of our parents have met previously in different ways. So I'm just going to go ahead now. So for us, I suppose every autistic child is unique, and every journey is different for both the child and the family. So my experience and our journey might be very different from another parent's journey. We knew very early on that our little boy was autistic. He is our only child, and a very precious little boy. So get emotional even talking about him. So when we started to look at this kind of parts of the journey that I wanted to talk about tonight, and I'm just going to go through this like this. It's not meant to be negative. I suppose I want people to understand the challenges that parents have at the moment when they are going through this process, but it is a journey, and the journey continues with you and throughout your life, and you change, and I suppose your child changes as well with you. So we're talking about looking at pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, early intervention, access to service, and then also access to education. So they're the areas that I'm going to cover. So we talk a little bit about pre-diagnosis. So if you're looking at pre-diagnosis, so you might be a parent and somebody's saying to you, look, there's something going on. I'm not quite sure what's going on with my child. The GP might say they're not hitting their milestones. What does that mean? Your public health nurse might say something like, you've red flags for autism. I don't know what that means. The child might or might not have communication difficulties. Maybe they're unusual behaviors, what everybody else thinks they're unusual, you're not quite sure. Sensory issues, and maybe they're slightly different. So in our case, I used to bring my child to clap handies, and it wasn't the right environment for him. It was too noisy. I didn't understand that. I was an older parent, and I thought, this is great, I'm going to bring him locally, but we didn't stay for very long. It wasn't the right place for our little man. So within that, I just looked at the different words that our parents we're talking about. So these are the kind of words that our parents would speak about. So they felt worried, they were concerned, they might have been in denial. Maybe somebody's parent might have said to them, look, I think there's something with your child. They hadn't got the knowledge, they lacked the knowledge there as well. Just trying to change. So they lack the knowledge there. So they're unsure of what to do, and they feel very protective of their child. So this is very much at the beginning. You're not sure what's going on and what are you going to do. So then you go about maybe trying to get a diagnosis, and we just heard, and you hear all the time, of how difficult this is for parents, and what do you do with this. For us, we went through the assessment of need process at the time. The assessment of need process, I suppose, it would be conducted by a number of professionals with your child, and then you might get referred for an ADOS and ADI or assessment to see if your child is autistic, and then get a service statement. And that all sounds great, But unfortunately, the system as it stands at the moment, you've large waiting lists, long waiting lists. So parents are often in the situation where they're waiting for this to happen, and or they might be in the position or not in the position to go forward and actually do a private assessment, and not everybody is able to do that. So you can be very concerned about your child and you're not quite sure about what to do. I think the thing of note now, though, is that you don't need a diagnosis to get support in school, etc. Just to say that to parents that might be here today. So it's very much around waiting and waiting to see if your child has child is considered to be autistic. So what were the words that we had there? A lot of our parents would feel lack of support. Where do I turn? Not quite sure what to do. How do I go about getting all these things? You know, trying to be accepting. They're fearful. They might experience grief, and it's not to say that I suppose it's people, maybe they don't understand a lot about what it's like to be autistic, and I suppose they had a certain idea about their own child. They've stress and worry. Also can feel a lot of pressure. They can withdraw from their friendships, their own friends, maybe their family, etc., because they're not quite sure how to cope with this themselves or how to manage their child. And sometimes, and in our own situation, it can be easier not to go out into social events, etc. If you're you know, you think your child might have a meltdown, etc. These are things that you begin to understand a lot more when you've had time to do that, and you very much want to do your best at all the time. So as you go on this journey yourself, you've gone from your pre-diagnosis, you're not quite sure, you've now gone into a diagnosis, and the initial thing, it's very new for any parent. So, you know, it can be quite a difficult time for parents there, and so they would need support. So after diagnosis, then you're into, maybe if your child is very young, and this is our journey, early intervention and accessing services. So you might, again, we've got large waiting lists. Again, we've talked about speech therapy, occupational therapy. Your child might need physiotherapy. You might need psychological support, but these are the supports that are very difficult for parents to access at the moment. Then you might decide, well, what am I going to do about preschool for my child? They might be in a mainstream preschool. They might not be able for that. Maybe it's because of the lack of expertise of the people who are there. Maybe they're not correctly supported. You might get AIM support. Some parents would know about that here, or maybe home tuition. The other thing is people start saying to you, well, have you tried this? Have you tried that? And it can be quite a minefield for parents, I think, very early on when they're not quite sure about what to do. So these are the words our parents spoke about today. So I just can't see that one, but waiting lists. You're your own case manager, so you're managing all this for your child. You can become a carer, and many of us have become carers and maybe decided this time a child needs early intervention to stop working. We have a lot of parents in our group that one of the parents is not working, or they're working part-time because of the needs of their child. Navigating the system can be difficult for parents. Again, no support. Sourcing professional help. So you might have to go and get your own team. So you have no supports, and then parents then decide, well, how can maybe I could afford to do this, or maybe how can maybe people taking loans and things like that to access therapies for their children. You're coordinating intervention. So after all of that, I suppose your child has been in preschool, and now you're thinking about the transition, and a lot about the transition for parents. There's different transition points, I think, for their child, and a lot of them is around education. So now your child is in preschool, and then you're trying to find an appropriate education for your child. And what does that mean? I suppose it's an education where a child is well supported. So then you're faced with lots of words, that these are all new words to lots of parents when they start off on this journey. The National Council for Special Education, Special Education Needs Officer, Special Needs Assistant, Special Education Teacher, Resource Hours, Mainstream Setting, Autism Special Classes, and Special School. So these are things that, again, your parents have to kind of navigate through and understand better, I suppose. And all they want to do is support their child and ensure that their child is well supported so that they can reach their full potential in school. So again, this is parents start searching for a place. Can they get a place? Working in partnership with your school. That's a very important thing for all parents to feel they do that. So if your child is in the mainstream setting, if your child is in an autism special class, that you work with your school very much to try and ensure that your child reaches their full potential. Again, you're back into the waiting list side of things here. What am I going to do here? I'm waiting for my child. They've no space. Lots of our parents have applied to 22, 23 different schools and are still waiting to see if they've got a class place this September. There's lack of choice. I suppose you see your late neighbours and children all heading off to their local school. There's lots of our children very well supported in their local schools, and we're very grateful for that. But there are some children, or a cohort of children, that will need a special class. And this is where parents can find that there's no support. You have to go and try and find that class yourself with very little support and input from the NCSE. So they might go in a taxi and a bus to school. So these are all the things that you're thinking about. Then you're stressed and you're worried again. And then you might feel that your child is, being discriminated against. And these are all things that you probably, wondering, why am I talking about that? I think it's important to talk about the parental journey. We very much embrace our children, and we'll talk about that now in a minute, but it's just to understand, I suppose, the difficulties that parents might have, and that in me explaining this to you, maybe you will understand better why you find that parents are particularly stressed. So financial supports and worries, these are things that parents start. Another navigation, domiciliary care allowances, incapacitated tax credit, carers allowance, carers benefit, carers leave. There's all things there. Again, parents can find there's mountains of paperwork, might be successful with that, difficulty putting down all your child can't do when there's so much that they can do. So that's very challenging for parents. It can be very time consuming. Again, you're navigating the system. And then financial strain. And financial strain would come in, I suppose, maybe one parent might decide that they're not unable to work. Maybe both parents aren't working. Maybe parents decide that, you know what, I'm going to have to try and get these therapies, the support therapies, like we were talking about speech therapy, OT, can be great help to a child. And in doing that, I'm putting myself under financial strain. So I think that's kind of important to understand. So after all this, so what are the impacts on parents and guardians? So it's not our children that cause a lot of the stress or difficulty. It's the system and trying to navigate the system. And in trying to do that, you're just trying to get the very best for your child. So this is from research, I suppose. Parents can often feel overwhelmed. There can be increased parenting stress, increased mental and physical health problems, and significant financial strain and time pressures. You can often feel that you're not good enough. There's higher rates of divorce and lower overall family well-being. So why is that? I suppose it's the relentless fight and battle at the moment, I suppose. Isolation for a parent, you feel a bit lonely, your child, it can be difficult if people don't have a full understanding of that. You're advocating, you might feel a little bit depressed about the situation, you don't feel equipped, and there's no services and there's no help, and you become a full-time carer. And you alluded to the lack of sleep there, and the exhaustion, mental and physically. So the impacts really on parents are around navigating a system that's really broken, and that really needs to be changed. And I know there's lots of work going on on AsIAM's behalf, doing a lot of work in that space. And I think in doing that, we can begin to embrace our children as things begin to change. So let's talk about what is important. So I've talked about kind of the journey there, the bits that I suppose are different transition points in a child's life between pre-diagnosis, diagnosis, early intervention into education, and then the impacts that are on on the parents. So how can you build a network of support? So as you begin to get through this journey, you begin to find that there's people out there that will support you as a parent. People like AsIAm, as I've said, people like the Middletown Centre for Autism. Then you're talking, what kind of people can help you out? And I suppose for myself personally, it's your family, you know, people being non-judgmental, your friends, people being accepting, understanding of you and of your child, informed. It's great that so many people here tonight kind of understand what autism is, to feel included, you know, invite that child and that parent to a family gathering. Don't exclude them, include them and understand how to include them. You know, somebody who's guiding or helpful, somebody who listens to you, you know, somebody you know that you can reach out to. And also it's important that you empower yourself and educate yourself so that you understand more about your child. And also in doing that, that very much empowers you. So there's lots of support. I suppose you do a family and friends network, other parents of autistic children. This is where we found things to have great support. There are support agencies. I spoke about AsIAm. Learning from autistic adults, I think, is really important. Online support and information, I would have found this great. Lots of Facebook pages, etc. That was really helpful to me. Becoming part of the community, reaching out to professionals, and I suppose also getting support maybe from your employer, etc., so they have a good understanding of maybe what you're going through, and maybe to support you there. So they're the kind of things for building a network of support. So what can you do to help in the community? It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a community to raise an autistic child. So what we want to be for us as parents, I suppose, is to be part of our local communities. And to be part of our local communities, our children need to be part of their local communities. And that means going to school in their local community, being able to be part of any of the different sporting activities, and things like that. That's very important that they are included. And by being included, you are included as a parent. Because if your child is, you know, maybe has to travel long distances to school, etc., you're not meeting people at the school gate, you're not having that interaction with others. And a child who's autistic becomes an adult who is autistic. And the community should really embrace difference and embrace our children. And in doing that, I suppose we're going to have a much more diverse and accepting society. So it's about acceptance, about love, about understanding, being non-judgmental, support, advocate on those children's behalf, include them, help them, assist, and educate yourself so that you can understand a little bit more about what it is like to be autistic. So I set up Involve Autism with a few other parents, and we have a great group of parents, and I suppose our three pillars are support, advocacy, and inclusion. So this has proved to be a great support network for us. We've made great friends, and we've great friendships because of that. Just kind of going back. So these are so we're a voice for autism in our local community, and we very much have come together to raise our voices on behalf of our children. But in doing that, I think we've all gone on a very strong journey together, and it's been great that we have each other to support each other locally. So I just wanted then to talk a little bit about our children. So here's some of our fabulous children. All of them are autistic. A lot of them will be in special classes, maybe in special schools, some are in mainstream. So they're all in different settings. They are very much why we're here, I suppose, and why I'm here. I would call myself an accidental advocate. I never thought when our child was diagnosed as autistic that I would be here to take a part of a webinar. So these are our children, and what do they bring to our lives? I thought about this. They bring joy, they make us laugh, they're resilient, they're happy, they're determined, they're sociable, they're loving, they're adventurous, they're affectionate, they have lots of potential, they're curious, and they've lots of interests. So there is such great things about our children, and there's so much to add to our communities, and they very much need to be part of them. So our journey, and I suppose the journey continues, and maybe in 10 years time, my own child would be here speaking about his journey. And I hope he's still talking to his mother. So I'm just going to leave it there. I think I'm just finished now, so I'll just stop sharing that.
Thank you so much for that, Miriam. Really, really enjoyed that. And it's so important to listen to the parental experience, of course, as well. I think autistic advocates and parents really need to be working together if we want to achieve inclusion. But also, if your child in 10 years' time wants to come on and share their own experiences, they're more than welcome to. But let's hope in 10 years' time, we won't need to be engaging in this level of spreading understanding and acceptance. Hopefully we can be working towards making difference the norm. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share that with us this evening. Now, there have been quite a number of questions have come in for our panel. So I will try and get through as many as possible. There's no way we'll be able to get through all of them. But what I would say is, if you have asked a question and it doesn't get answered, please send your question over to info@asiam.ie. And if it's a question that's for us, we will absolutely answer it. Or if it's a question for anybody in our panel and we didn't get to it, by all means, please rest assured that we will forward it on. We're now going to stop recording the session just so we can protect the privacy of the questions that have been asked. And this recording so far will be available on our website and on social media in the coming days.